Yeah, my own feeling. Actually, Jojo, and Kun. Yeah. Charlie, if you start to take pictures. So if you start to take pictures. Sorry. Yeah, they come, but I don't think so that we are looking for the second.
He can join.
We will walk in and we will not.
We'll be joining later on.
Is it? That's what they really do.
You pull your side, what's up?
You check like, I saw the one time, I'm going to get some. This
But you can give me cut to the top.
Exactly.
I want to just customize the whole thing.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Beatrice Brew, and I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a peace and security specialist with an interest in youth development and social impact in education and skills development. I am very pleased to be moderating this discussion with my, should I say, long-lost cousin. We are still yet to trace our family house in somewhere in the western region. Ambassador Cabral Blay, I'm here. In a few minutes, we'll also be joined by Ambassador D.K. Osei.
I want to thank the organizers for their platform to share some insights and experiences with the good people here and those watching on social media.
When I when I first shared the flyer of my book club, the comments I got back was, these two are legends, and I could not help but agree. And one of the first things I'd like to know is, there something inherently in a diplomat that makes you want to write?
I guess you are a bit too charitable by describing me as a legend. I'm just a simple guy who has tried to use literary forms to tell my story. Let me also say that I'm not your typical diplomat, because I spent the first 25 years of my life in the media, in various aspects of media work, publishing, editing, and I use my experience in those two countries to write my memoirs, Between the Lion and Elephant, Memoirs of an African Diplomat. But earlier on, I had done a book, I think way back in 2001, which was my memoirs as a journalist. And I even started this writing business in 1994. I spent the year 1991 in the US at the height of the first Gulf crisis. And the historian in me, because I study history and sociology, tells me that when you have lived through a certain experience, you need to record that your experience for posterity. So that's what inspires me to write. And when I was a journalist in those difficult times, the difference between writing a memoir and journalism is that is the first draft of history, that's journalism. But after the event,
Do you journal? How much journaling do you do, and how much of it has helped in your writing?
well, if I take my first book, the Tears for a Continent, an American Diary, there I found myself very lonely on the campus on a campus in Cambridge, and I then discovered the computer. So I spent my times alone, writing. So you see, I kept a diary of a sort. With my memoirs as a journalist, I didn't do any journal. I just sat back and reflected on various aspects of my life. And with my memoirs as an ambassador, I tried to keep a diary, a journal, but somehow I wasn't faithful. So when it came to writing the book, I used source materials, checked my files, and also went to memory. And in a way, I'm sure I was able to capture the essentials of my 7 years as an ambassador.
Your book, Between the Lion and the Elephant, Memoirs of an African Diplomat, is one of my favorite memoirs. Of course, not because it's you, but it's one of the books that made me have one of the answers to my own confusion, which I shall share with you in the following chapters. Was going through your mind at the time, and why did you feel like you jumped from 5 planets to the light?
Well, I was hoping Ambassador Dike will be here because he has spent many more years in the service than I did, over 30 years. When I look back, I had, first of all, there's a notion that diplomacy is all about champagne drinking and partying, which is not the case. Now, I was either fortunate or unfortunate to be posted for the first time to Sierra Leone, which was at the height of a civil war. And by the time I left, I think peace had arrived. So naturally you expect to be posted to a safer society, a more comfortable society. Then I was thrown again into a war zone. So the analogy of going from a frying pan to fire sums up the transition from one war zone to another war zone. The only saving grace for my Côte d'Ivoire experience is that unlike Sierra Leone, the basic infrastructure in the capital was intact. There was uninterrupted electricity, uninterrupted power supply, and nightlife was as robust as you can imagine. So it was quite an interesting situation in terms of conditions. But then if you travel up north, where the rebels were headquartered, then it was just like being in Sierra Leone, because infrastructure was down, no supplies, people had vacated their homes, and you could feel a sense of insecurity wherever you moved. But I think the Bible says that blessed are the peacemakers. So those two situations enabled me to be part of history, seeing to the return of normalcy in the two countries.
And is there any experience that confirmed your fears whilst you were in Côte d'Ivoire?
Well, as I said, the country was divided just as Sierra Leone was divided. And everywhere you found armed soldiers, checking passengers. The only relief for a diplomat was that you were not subject to those measures, except that there was a day when the young forces, a guy called Blake Boudet, the young patriots, they were a pro-Gbagbo force. And I was moving from my residence at a place called Cocody to the airport. And they stopped me. And the point of the anger was that I was from Ghana, where Kofi Annan, of course, comes from. And in their belief, Kofi Annan was part of the problem. So they tried to subdue it to some harassment. But luckily for me, I could speak a couple of Ivorian languages. Understanding, so they let me pass. Well, that's the difference between a diplomat and an ordinary citizen. Because when you fly the flag, it gives some leeway. But at the height of the crisis, the flag was not enough. But because we were from Ghana and Kofi Annan was the Secretary General causing all the trouble in their view for the Ivorian crisis?
Thank you very much, Senator Cabral. So you may have noticed that a young man has just joined us. And for those of you who do not know, like having a conversation with you at Messiad or any of them.
First of all, I'm wondering if I belong here. Because this is supposed to be a platform for writers. Since I don't consider myself a writer yet, be that as may, I think that I feel honored to have been invited to join this. But to come back to your question, I'm sure you remember that when you were a student in Lyceum, all of you used to pester me with the same thing. When are you going to write a book? Particularly Nana who's sitting in front of us. He never stopped giving me a hard time. And you know, I started taking it seriously when I started teaching at the University of Addis Ababa and at Kofi Annan Peacekeeping Training Center. And can you imagine, I went to give a lecture at Oxford and the very same question came up. It would be I knew I had no talent for writing, and I didn't consider myself a potential writer at all. But I must admit, once I started getting into it, I was enjoying it. Because it was useful for me, myself, to remember what had happened over the last 40 years. And some of the adventures, just recounting them, brought back very good memories. So that's what led me to write a book. Basically, you people giving me a hard time in class.
Are there any adventures that are missing from the book?
Oh, many, many, many adventures are missing from the book. In fact, in the middle of writing this book, one of your colleagues, who was also a student at Lyceum, visited me at home, and I was telling him how I was struggling to finish the book. And he said, Ambassador, you can never finish a book if you want to talk about all your adventures. So break it down into maybe a sub-region, then do something on Africa, then do something on multilateral organizations. And you know, I listened to him. And 3 weeks after his visit, I had finished the volume 1. Because he then gave me an idea about how I could segment it. So I can assure you that volume 2 is far advanced. Because, you know, the adventure span over such a long period. And I also had I was fortunate to have had a very spicy career, if you see what I mean. And I also served in some very dangerous areas. So I suppose that's what makes it easy to continue. I'm somewhere along the way in volume 2. And now that I'm enjoying writing, I can also assure you that I've started writing a textbook for master's students. And then I've made notes for a book I call How Not to Govern Ghana. This covers the 8 years when I was Secretary to the President. And Beatrice, trust me, you will love it. And I know many, many people is a well-known, acclaimed writer. How dare I imagine that I can collaborate with Cabral? We can collaborate on other things, but I've learned quite a bit from Cabral since I started making notes for my books. You know, Cabral is a serious writer, so he's been keeping a diary over the years, and the diaries have helped him. You know, I never kept a diary until 2001, when I had a very sketchy diary about daily happenings, but not in detail. So I've learned from him, but you're right, Cabral and I come from very far, from student days on campus. We are like brothers. In fact, the formation of the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana was Cabral's idea, and he just pulled me along. When I was campaigning to be students' SRC president, Cabral was one of my main campaign people. You know, we come from far. I'm talking of 1972, can you imagine?
Well, it's like asking I just want to say that when I see Professor Ayidoho here, so when such an
with your publications and how,
Diki Albanis, and I'm aware that one of our colleagues, Ambassador Tinkran, is working on this. He's almost finished it. And I think for the records, one of the aims of the Council on Foreign Relations is to encourage our colleagues and other professionals to document their experiences as a way of contributing to the growth of literature and providing textbooks for the various fields. So I believe that you know, Ambassador Dike's book had very good review, and that is going to encourage more people to do that. And I think, as you might have discovered, there are many ways to kill a cat. You know, so whilst you may want to do a very academic work, the personal touch that ambassadors bring to their collections is said that any of us can write a book. You only need a good editor, you need somebody to encourage you, and if you cannot write, you can get a shadow writer, which they do in other countries. You editate, you can editate, and that's the way to make sure that your experiences are documented for posterity. But when I look back, many of our first generation politicians have joined our ancestors without telling their story. Imagine someone like Kubaduse, one of the most colorful characters in the independence struggle, had put in his book. If you take Prime Minister Buzia, as a scholar, he wrote a couple of books. But when he left politics, or during his podcast, he didn't write any book on his career. So you need to go to secondary sources, sometimes with speeches, to know about his philosophies and what contribution he might have made to Ghana. So I think it's good that we are in the season of book writing. That's what I'll say. all over people are writing books. I think it's very good for our literary story.
The Kinshasa experience.
Kinshasa experience. Let me share one privileged conversation which as Cabral has just triggered off, which is in volume 2. And this is why I was telling you that I'm in a hurry to finish the volume 2. Cabral talked about Kroboduse. And it's a shame that we didn't benefit from the rich political experience of Kroboduse. But let me tell you a story Lee Kuan Yew told us once. Went to visit Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, and he was talking about Ghana's development and the strategy for getting Ghana out of our current state. But there's one thing that he said that I've never forgotten. He said, do you remember Kroboduse? We said, yes. He says, you know, when I last visited Ghana, Kroboduse met me at the airport. And I asked him, how come you are now Minister of State Protocol? The last time I was here, you were a full cabinet minister. He said, Lee Kuan Yew, you got it wrong. Now I'm Minister of State Protocol. I receive heads of states. Which of the ministers in cabinet can be deemed as important as I am? And his account of Kroboduse is just exactly reflective of the political astuteness of the Krobo that we knew as young men. And this is part of the volume 2. I'm trying to wink to you about volume 2. Now, to talk about Kinshasa, you know, when you're writing about diplomacy, you see, it reminded me about Kinshasa. There's a thin line between safeguarding state security, confidentiality, and still telling the story without creating problems for your country. That is why I was compelled to leave a lot of things out about Kinshasa. But I happened to arrive at Kinshasa at a very dangerous period. The Kadogos, who were Kabila seniors, junior soldiers, normally around 16 years, arrived in Kinshasa without a word of Lingala, which was a language spoken in Kinshasa. The army had disintegrated. There was no police station which was functioning. And there were constant attempts to overthrow Kabila Senior. So you can imagine the circumstances in which we worked. In fact, somewhere in the book, I recount that for the first time in my career, I had to go to work with security people. And I had 2 security vehicles, one ahead of me with 15 soldiers and one behind me with 15 soldiers. I mean, the number of, and 20 minutes away from Kinshasa, there was a war going on in Brazzaville, and I had concurrent accreditation to Brazzaville. Not far away was Kigali, and I had a responsibility for Kigali. So you can imagine, and for Burundi. But this was a very difficult period. I mean, I cannot describe it. And there were so many soldiers from many African countries, from Angola, from Zimbabwe, from Rwanda, and then unfortunately, the locals in Kinshasa could not stand the Rwandans who had taken over Kinshasa. And then there was the war in the east of DRC. There were the Interamwe, the Banyamulenges trying to, it was complicated. So you should understand why I do not in the book recount all of it, because one should also be careful, as a career person, what you're allowed to say and what you don't. But there's enough spice in there to give you an idea about it. And also, career diplomats, the younger ones, think that it's all champagne drinking, Pierre Cardin suits and traveling first class. It is not like that. I mean, there are difficulties in the diplomat's time when you live dangerously. And I wanted to bring that home so that my younger colleagues don't go off with the conviction that, they're joining a service which is all plush and fashion and champagne every day. It is not like that. And I wanted to bring them closer to reality.
Thank you, Ambassador Singh. Just before the session began, I was having a conversation with Ambassador.
What do you think your purpose in life is, and whether you want to make an impact? For instance, I happen to know that for non-career ambassadors, when they are appointed, they are taken through maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks of a refresher course, which doesn't answer all the questions. Then they will ask you to read a country file. What I also know for a fact is that for you to be an effective person, no matter your profession, whether it is law, an academic or diplomat, knowledge is power. What it means is that you need to develop the culture of reading, the habit of reading, which is very missing in today's generation. What do we see as the source of information? Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, and even there, all those, if you're a diplomat, as I told a class recently, in traditional diplomacy, at least what I discovered when I was in Senegal, that was not there. Internet had not arrived. So most of the officers will begin their mornings by scanning through newspapers. Now, today, a smartphone will do all those things for you. Now, if you want to monitor American foreign policy, right from the White House, you only have to follow Trump on his handle. But that's not enough. It's not enough because books offer more perspectives, more insight. And so I believe that the more knowledgeable you are, no matter your field, the more effective you can become. And so I'm happy that coming here this morning, I see there's a lot of literary work going on, and with the kind of work the Writers Project of Ghana is doing, what GAO is doing, I believe that you move away from just being Twitter and Snapchat and do serious research. And that's why these books coming up will help. And I don't think you will have to study to pass exams. And that's the only time you want to read. I mean, if you look at in recent times, about 3 or 4 books have come up in America that will give you an insight into what is happening to the Trumpian presidency and the evolution of American democracy. This you cannot get by just reading headlines. You have to go and dive deep into books, and that's what you should encourage people to do. particularly professionals and diplomats.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Cabral more, and particularly for diplomats, it is even more urgent. You know, in our time when we joined the service, our directors told us that you had to read from archaeology in the world before he gets out of his bed. And even if it's on the net, you can get one angle of a story from Radio France. But somebody who's more committed to his job will see what the comments are being made on the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, the French, the British, what African Union is saying about it. You immediately see the difference between those who are serious and who are not. So even on the net, if you want to have, and in our job, as my colleagues here will tell you, because of ICT, what we as traditional diplomats used to do in terms of political reporting has changed radically. So a diplomat needs to provide what Nanaya will call superior information. And it is only the superior information right now which will be relevant to your country. Because everybody is watching television, everybody is reading the newspapers. So if all you do is to pull a bit from here, you are not helping your government. But your ability to access the information which is not available in the public domain immediately makes you a better diplomat. And that also comes with a bit of proper networking and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. So as we wrap up the conversation, my final question.
The council has been organizing seminars on the concern you have raised. And let me just then say that it has changed everything. The way we, I can't even see your face. I can't see many faces here. And of course, if you have a very big head like mine, you can identify from afar. But otherwise, it has changed. You go to funeral. One of the culture at funeral is to greet everybody. Now you don't know greet. You don't, socialization has gone down. So COVID has changed the way we live, and obviously it's bound to change a profession like diplomacy that for years depend on the personal touch. I can imagine how cocktails look like now, but when, and it can be confirmed by Him, you get to do a lot on the cocktail circuit. You don't get the, when you're holding the glass, you don't drink you use it to interact. Can you do that freely today? I don't think so. But that's on the social side. But I'm sure you can offer more perspectives on multilateral diplomacy and other negotiations and things like that.
Yeah, as you know, at the time we were being trained as diplomats, secrecy Methods of diplomacy like summitry and direct dial are available. We have found a way of making some of those new forms of diplomacy like summitry the real platform for diplomacy. In other words, during the UN General Assembly, most heads of states were not interested in the speeches which were being made. The real work was being done in the corridors. That's where the real work would have been done about this time this year. And many appointments were set up long before New York. The idea was to be able to meet face to face and to negotiate the real issues. Now COVID has thrown all through the window. So we have to find more adapted methods of doing our job. And I think that is the challenge that the diplomats have now. Because the main function of diplomacy is negotiation in its all forms. And as you know, I mean, around the table usually is what clinches the deal. But the real work, as you also know, is done way before we get to the around the table negotiation. That kind of negotiation depends on reading your body language, walking in and sizing up everybody's mood before and deciding which subject I'll raise first and so on. All that has changed. Because I wonder, going forward, how we're going to cope. Mediation has changed. I mean, and you were asking about the sub-region. This is perhaps the most crucial periods where preventive diplomacy is required in our sub-region. Because, I mean, indicators of potential instability exist everywhere. I'm not just talking about Cote d'Ivoire and Mali. I'm talking about Guinea. I'm talking about Benin. I'm talking about Niger. I'm talking about Guinea-Bissau. And there are triggers which, for any diplomat, are evident. And so this is the time those who are in charge of diplomacy in the sub-region should be actively engaged in preventive diplomacy, so that going forward, we will not have the kind of predictions that we're seeing. Because as you know, since the hostages were released in Mali, there have been extremist attacks. And as you know, Blaise Compaoré is still negotiating with Kabore to come in the first quarter of next year. Kabore is saying he can come, but he's going to have to face the courts. As you know, Blaise's brother has been released by the courts to come to Ouagadougou. There's so much that requires to be taken care of now. I don't envy whoever is chairman of ECOWAS now at all.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Cabral Blay. I'm here.